Picture this. It's March 1901, and you're standing on the French Riviera, watching what looks like a completely ordinary race week. Wealthy Europeans showing off their horseless carriages, primitive automobiles that are basically motorized buggies. Loud, slow, dangerous contraptions that most people consider amusing toys for the rich. Then something appears on the road that doesn't belong. A low-slung, sleek machine that moves differently than anything else. It's not wobbling or lurching like the other vehicles. It's gliding, accelerating smoothly, cornering with confidence. The crowd goes silent. What is that thing? This is the moment that changes everything. The moment when the automobile stops being a curiosity and becomes a serious machine. The moment when one car, the Mercedes 35 PS, establishes the template that every car built since has followed, and almost nobody knows this story. You see, when people talk about the first car, they mention Karl Benz's patent motor wagon from 1886. That's technically true. It was the first practical automobile. But calling it a car is like calling the Wright Flyer a modern airplane. It worked, but it had almost nothing in common with what cars would become. The Mercedes 35 PS, introduced in 1901, was different. It was the first automobile designed from the ground up as a car, not as a motorized carriage. Every technical feature that defines modern automobiles, the long wheelbase, the low center of gravity, the powerful engine mounted low in the chassis, the pressed steel frame, the honeycomb radiator, the gate change gearbox, all of it came from this one revolutionary machine. But here's what makes this story fascinating. The Mercedes 35 PS wasn't created by an automotive company. It was designed to satisfy one extremely wealthy, extremely demanding customer who had a vision of what automobiles could become. A man who wasn't an engineer, wasn't a designer, but somehow understood what the future of transportation looked like. His name was Emil Jelinek, and this is the hidden story of how his obsession, Wilhelm Maybach's genius, and a tragic death at a hill climb race created the first modern automobile and launched the Mercedes brand that would define luxury and performance for the next century. To understand why the Mercedes 35 PS was revolutionary, you need to understand what automobiles were like before it existed. In 1900, most cars were literally horseless carriages. Take a carriage, remove the horse, bolt on an engine, and hope it works. The typical automobile of 1900 looked absurd by modern standards. Imagine a tall, narrow wooden wagon with bicycle-sized wheels, a tiller for steering, and an engine bolted somewhere, often under the seat or hanging off the back. The whole contraption stood 5 or 6 feet high, with the driver perched on top like he was still expecting a horse in front. These early automobiles were tall, narrow, and unstable. The engine was typically mounted high in the chassis, because that's where engineers thought it should go. Accessible for maintenance, they reasoned. Nobody considered that putting weight high up would make the vehicle want to tip over every time you turned a corner. The center of gravity was absurdly high, often level with or above the driver's seat. This created terrifying handling characteristics. At speeds above 30 kilometers per hour, these cars felt like they were constantly on the edge of rolling over. Drivers learned to slow to a crawl before any turn, because anything faster meant risking disaster. The wheelbase, the distance between front and rear axles, was short because that's how carriages were built. A typical carriage had a wheelbase of 1.5 to 1.8 meters, and early automobiles simply copied this. But short wheelbases that work fine at horse-walking speeds become dangerously unstable at mechanical speeds. The cars would dart and weave unpredictably. Steering was vague and imprecise. Most early cars used tiller steering, literally a vertical stick connected to the front axle, because that's what boats used, and early automotive engineers borrowed ideas from anywhere they could find them. Some used wheel steering, but the mechanical linkages were so crude that you'd turn the wheel and wait to see if the front wheels responded. The suspension, when it existed at all, was basic leaf springs or nothing. Many early cars were essentially rigid, the wheels connected directly to the chassis through simple axles. Every bump translated directly into jarring impacts for the driver and passengers. Roads in 1900 were terrible, and these cars made them feel worse. They were slow, unreliable, and genuinely dangerous. At speeds above 30 kilometers per hour, they became frighteningly unstable. Cornering meant slowing to a crawl and hoping the thing didn't tip over. The brakes, when they worked at all, were barely adequate for stopping from walking pace. Many early cars had brakes only on the rear wheels, or sometimes just on the transmission brake that slowed the driveshaft. Engines were primitive by any standard. Single-cylinder engines were common, producing maybe 5-10 horsepower with tremendous vibration and noise. Two-cylinder engines were considered advanced. The engines were slow revving, often limited to 500-800 revolutions per minute maximum, and produced power irregularly, making smooth acceleration impossible. Cooling was a constant problem. Early engines used evaporative cooling, just let the water boil off, and refill it, or primitive radiators that were barely adequate. Overheating was common, especially on any extended drive or uphill climb. Drivers carried extra water and expected frequent stops to let the engine cool and refill the cooling system. The ignition systems were unreliable. Early cars used hot tube ignition, or primitive electrical systems that frequently failed. Starting the engine required hand cranking, which was dangerous. If the engine backfired, the crank could spin backward violently, breaking arms or wrists. Even when running, engines often misfired, stalled, or ran roughly. Transmissions, when they existed beyond simple belt drives, were crude two-speed units with jarring shifts. Many cars used belt or chain drives instead of gears, which limited power transmission and made maintenance difficult. The driver had limited control over vehicle speed beyond the throttle and crude brakes. Most importantly, nobody really knew what an automobile should be. Should it be a fast, lightweight runabout for short trips? A heavy, stable touring car for long distances? Something designed for racing or something for daily transportation? Some thought electric propulsion was the future. Others preferred steam. Internal combustion was just one option among several. The industry was still figuring out fundamental questions about the vehicle's very nature. Should the engine be in the front, middle, or rear? How many wheels should it have? 3 or 4? What about steering, tiller, or wheel? Should there be a transmission or direct drive? Every manufacturer had different answers because nobody knew what was right. Some manufacturers built large, heavy touring cars, emphasizing comfort and stability at low speeds. Others built light, simple runabouts for easy urban transportation. Racing cars were typically just more powerful versions of road cars, with minimal modification. There was no consensus on what worked best, because the technology was too new. The public's perception of automobiles reflected this uncertainty. Most people viewed them as wealthy men's toys, expensive, unreliable machines for sporting about on weekends, not serious transportation. Horses were faster, more reliable, cheaper to maintain, and didn't break down constantly. Why would anyone choose an automobile? Automobile racing, just beginning to develop as a sport, highlighted these problems. Races were often won by the car that broke down least, rather than the one that was fastest. Reliability mattered more than raw speed, because most cars couldn't finish a race without mechanical problems. Winning meant limping across the finish line while competitors retired with broken engines or crashed after losing control. Wilhelm Maybach and Gottlieb Daimler had been building automobiles since the 1880s. Daimler had started with a primitive motorcycle, then moved to four-wheeled vehicles. Their Daimler Motor Company produced cars, but they were incremental improvements on the horseless carriage concept, not revolutionary rethinks. By 1900, Maybach was Daimler Motor Company's chief engineer and designer. He was brilliant, one of the greatest automotive engineers who ever lived, but he was working within the constraints of what customers expected and what manufacturing could produce. His cars were good, but they were still fundamentally horseless carriages. Then Emil Jelinek entered the picture. Jelinek was an Austrian businessman, diplomat, and automobile enthusiast living in Nice, France. He was wealthy, connected to European aristocracy, and absolutely obsessed with speed. He discovered automobiles in the 1890s and became convinced they represented the future of transportation. Born in 1853 in Leipzig, Jelinek had lived a peripatetic life across Europe. He'd worked in insurance, made a fortune in business, and served as Austro-Hungarian consul in Nice. a largely ceremonial position that gave him diplomatic status and social connections. By the late 1890s, he was wealthy enough to indulge his passions, and automobiles had become his obsession. Jelinek was exactly the kind of customer early automobile manufacturers needed: rich, influential, connected to other wealthy potential buyers, and willing to pay premium prices for the latest technology. But he was also demanding, opinionated, and pushy. He didn't just want to buy cars, he wanted to shape what cars would become. His involvement with automobiles began around 1897 when he purchased a Daimler vehicle. He wasn't just enthusiastic about the machine itself, he was fascinated by the possibilities it represented. He envisioned automobiles becoming the primary mode of transportation for the wealthy, replacing horses and carriages entirely. This wasn't obvious in 1897 when most people viewed cars as amusing but impractical toys. But Jelinek wasn't just an enthusiast, he was a visionary with specific ideas about what automobiles should be. He bought Daimler vehicles and resold them to wealthy clients on the French Riviera. But he kept pushing Daimler for faster, more powerful, better handling cars. He wanted machines that could actually compete in the emerging sport of automobile racing. He established himself as Daimler's sales agent on the Côte d'Azur, a lucrative territory where wealthy Europeans wintered and money flowed freely. Jelinek would demonstrate Daimler cars to potential buyers, arrange test drives, and close sales. He was good at it, charismatic, knowledgeable, and well-connected. Daimler benefited enormously from his efforts. But Jelinek had ambitions beyond just selling existing products. He saw opportunities Daimler wasn't pursuing. He understood that racing success would drive sales far more effectively than traditional marketing. He recognized that the French Riviera social scene, where wealthy aristocrats gathered each winter, was the perfect market for high-performance automobiles. And he knew what these customers wanted better than the engineers in Germany did. Jelinek understood something that most people didn't. Racing wasn't just sport. It was the fastest way to prove automotive technology, to push engineering boundaries, to demonstrate that automobiles could be fast, reliable, and safe. Whoever dominated racing would dominate the market. In the late 1890s, automobile racing was primitive, but growing rapidly. Events ranged from city-to-city road races covering hundreds of kilometers, to hill climbs testing a car's ability to climb steep mountain roads. These races attracted huge crowds, generated newspaper coverage, and provided bragging rights for manufacturers. But they were also dangerous. Cars crashed, drivers were injured or killed, and the public viewed racing as reckless. Jelinek participated in this racing scene himself, not as a professional driver, but as a wealthy gentleman racer. He enjoyed the competition, the speed, the social aspects of racing events. But he was also frustrated by the limitations of available cars. They were too slow, too unstable, too unreliable. He wanted better, and he knew others did too. His family life centered around automobiles. His daughter Mercedes, born in 1889, grew up surrounded by cars and racing. Jelinek would take her to races, let her ride in fast cars, and shared his enthusiasm for automotive technology. By all accounts, she shared her father's love of speed, unusual for a girl of that era, but reflective of Jelinek's progressive attitudes. In 1899, Jelinek commissioned a special Daimler racing car for the Nice Race Week, an annual event where wealthy automobile owners gathered on the Côte d'Azur to race, show off their machines, and compete for prizes and prestige. This race week was where reputations were made and automotive innovations were demonstrated. The car Daimler built for Jelinek was called the Daimler Phoenix. It had a 23-horsepower engine, which was powerful for the time. Jelinek raced it himself and did reasonably well. But he wanted more. He always wanted more. He began pressuring Maybach for a more powerful, more advanced design. In March 1900, tragedy struck. Wilhelm Bauer, a Daimler employee and driver, was killed racing a Daimler vehicle at La Turbie hill climb near Nice. The car crashed during the competition, and Bauer died from his injuries. It was a devastating blow to Daimler Motor Company, and a wake-up call about the dangers of racing with inadequate vehicle design. The La Turbie crash forced a reckoning. The existing automobile design philosophy, tall, narrow vehicles with high centers of gravity, was fundamentally flawed. At racing speeds, These cars became dangerously unstable. Something had to change. Either automobiles would remain slow, safe, and boring, or someone had to completely rethink how they were built. Emil Jelinek saw opportunity in tragedy. He approached Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach with a proposal. He would commit to purchasing 36 vehicles if Daimler would build a completely new car according to his specifications. Not just a faster version of existing designs, but a fundamentally different automobile. Jelinek's specifications were radical. The car should be longer and lower. The engine should be more powerful, at least 35 horsepower. The center of gravity should be as low as possible. The wheelbase should be extended for stability. It should be capable of speeds exceeding 80 kilometers per hour safely. And most importantly, it should corner confidently without the terrifying instability of existing designs. This wasn't just a customer order. This was a complete redesign of the automobile from first principles. Jelinek was essentially telling Maybach, forget everything you know about how cars are built, and design something that actually makes sense for high-speed operation. Maybach was intrigued, but cautious. What Jelinek proposed was risky, a massive departure from proven designs. If it failed, Daimler Motor Company's reputation would suffer. But if it succeeded, they would leapfrog every competitor and establish a commanding technical lead. Gottlieb Daimler, the company's founder, died in March 1900, right as these discussions were happening. His death changed the company's dynamics. Paul Daimler, Gottlieb's son, took over some leadership roles. But Wilhelm Maybach became the key technical figure with more freedom to pursue radical designs. The timing was perfect for Jelinek's proposal. Maybach began work on the new design in MID-1900. He had about 6 months to create an entirely new automobile for the March 1901 Nice Race Week, an impossibly short timeline for such a radical departure from existing designs. But Maybach was motivated by the challenge and by the technical freedom Jelinek's commission provided. Wilhelm Maybach was 54 years old in 1900, at the peak of his abilities as an engineer. He'd worked with Gottlieb Daimler since 1872, and together they'd pioneered much of early automotive technology. Maybach was methodical, careful, brilliant with mechanical systems. He thought in terms of efficiency and elegance, making things work properly rather than just making them work. The challenge Jelinek presented was daunting. Create a car that could safely exceed 80 kilometers per hour when contemporary designs became dangerous above 50 kilometers per hour. Make it stable enough for confident cornering at speed. Give it enough power to be competitive in racing while remaining reliable enough for road use. And do all this in 6 months. Maybach approached the problem systematically. First, he analyzed why existing designs failed at high speeds. The immediate answer was obvious. High center of gravity made them unstable. But why was the center of gravity so high? Because components were arranged for easy access rather than optimal physics. The solution: rearrange everything based on weight distribution and center of gravity. The design that emerged was revolutionary. Maybach started with the fundamentals: lower the center of gravity, extend the wheelbase, and make the car wider for stability. This meant completely abandoning the carriage-derived proportions that defined existing automobiles. He began by sketching the basic layout. The engine would sit low in the chassis, positioned longitudinally between the front wheels. This location provided several advantages. It put significant weight over the front axle for steering control. It allowed direct drive to the rear wheels through a centrally mounted transmission, and it placed the heaviest component as low as possible. The frame design was critical. Maybach designed a pressed steel frame, lightweight but extremely rigid, that formed the structural backbone of the vehicle. Previous cars often used wooden frames reinforced with metal, but Maybach recognized that pressed steel could provide superior strength-to-weight ratio while allowing precise component mounting. The frame rails ran the length of the vehicle, sitting low to the ground. Cross members tied the rails together, creating a rigid structure that resisted twisting forces. Every mounting point for major components was carefully considered for optimal weight distribution and ease of maintenance. The wheelbase was set at 2,345 millimeters, extraordinarily long for the era when most cars had wheelbases around 1,800 millimeters or less. This length provided stability at high speeds, but created challenges for turning radius and overall vehicle length. Maybach accepted these trade-offs because physics demanded the longer wheelbase for stable high-speed operation. The track width, the lateral distance between wheels on the same axle, was increased to 1,420 millimeters. This made the car significantly wider than competitors, improving cornering stability and allowing the car to sit lower without risking ground contact on corners. The wider track also provided more interior space for the driver and passenger. These proportions looked strange compared to contemporary automobiles. The Mercedes appeared low, long, and wide, almost squat compared to the tall, narrow, horseless carriages. But Maybach understood that appearance didn't matter. Physics did. These proportions would work at speed, and that's what mattered. The frame was a pressed steel structure, lightweight but rigid, that positioned all major components as low as possible. The engine sat low in the chassis, not perched high like in previous designs. The fuel tank was positioned low and centered. The driver and passenger seats were dropped into the frame rather than sitting on top of it. The wheelbase was stretched to 2,345 millimeters, extraordinarily long for the era. This provided stability and allowed the car to track straight at high speeds. The track width was increased to 1,420 millimeters, making the car wider and more planted in corners. These proportions looked strange compared to contemporary automobiles, but made perfect sense from a physics standpoint. The engine was a masterpiece. Maybach designed a four-cylinder inline engine with 5,913 cubic centimeters displacement, massive for 1900. It produced 35 horsepower at just 950 revolutions per minute, which doesn't sound impressive today, but was extraordinary for the time. More importantly, the engine was smooth, reliable, and produced usable power across a wide RPM range. The engine featured individual cylinders cast in pairs, a T-head valve arrangement with mechanically operated inlet and exhaust valves, and a low-tension magneto-ignition system designed by Robert Bosch. The cooling system used a Honeycomb radiator, a Maybach innovation that provided much better cooling efficiency than previous water jackets or tube radiators. The Honeycomb radiator deserves special attention because it was genuinely revolutionary. Previous radiators were essentially just pipes with water flowing through them, inefficient and prone to overheating. Maybach's Honeycomb design featured thousands of small passages that dramatically increased surface area, allowing much more effective heat dissipation. This design would become standard on automobiles for decades. The transmission was a 4-speed gate-change gearbox, another innovation. Instead of the crude belt drives or 2-speed transmissions common at the time, Maybach's gearbox offered 4 ratios selected by moving a lever through a gate pattern. This gave the driver much better control over the vehicle's performance across different speeds and conditions. The steering system used a worm and nut mechanism that provided direct, responsive control. Combined with the longer wheelbase and lower center of gravity, this made the car dramatically more controllable than anything else on the road. For the first time, a driver could confidently steer at speed without fighting vague, imprecise steering. The suspension used semi-elliptic leaf springs front and rear, conventional for the era, but carefully tuned to work with the car's lower center of gravity and longer wheelbase. The result was a car that rode more smoothly than competitors while remaining stable in corners. The brakes operated on the rear wheels only, using mechanical linkages and expanding shoes inside brake drums. This wasn't ideal by modern standards, but it was adequate for the era and represented the current state of the art. The key was that the car's stability and controllability made braking less dramatic. You weren't fighting to keep the vehicle pointed straight during emergency stops. The body was lightweight aluminum over a wooden frame. The design was open, with minimal weather protection. This was a racing car, after all. But the proportions were elegant and purposeful. Low, long, and wide. It looked fast, even standing still. It looked nothing like the tall, ungainly, horseless carriages of the era. There was one more crucial detail: the name. Emil Jelinek insisted the car not be called Daimler. He wanted a completely new brand identity. He proposed naming it after his daughter, Mercedes Jelinek, an 11-year-old girl who reportedly loved automobiles and speed as much as her father did. The name Mercedes was perfect. Exotic, sophisticated, aristocratic, memorable. It was Spanish. Mercedes' mother was Spanish, giving it international appeal. It sounded modern and elegant, not industrial or Germanic. Jelinek convinced Daimler Motor Company to use the name, creating one of the most successful brand identities in automotive history. The Mercedes 35 PS was completed in December 1900, just weeks before the March 1901 Nice Race Week. There was barely time for testing. Maybach and his team conducted basic validation, confirming the engine ran properly, the transmission shifted smoothly, and the handling was stable. But they couldn't fully evaluate what they'd created. The car was shipped to Nice for the race week. When it was unloaded and prepared for competition, people gathered to look at this strange new machine. It looked wrong, too low, too long, too wide. Where were the tall wheels? Where was the high seating position? This couldn't possibly work. But Emil Jelinek was confident. He'd gotten exactly what he'd commissioned. This was his vision made real. He'd even brought along Wilhelm Werner, a professional driver he'd hired to race the car. Werner would demonstrate what the Mercedes could do. Nice Race Week in March 1901 included various competitions: hill climbs, sprints, distance races. The Mercedes 35 PS entered multiple events, and from its first appearance, it was clear something extraordinary had arrived. While other cars lurched and wobbled, the Mercedes glided smoothly. While competitors struggled to exceed 60 kilometers per hour, the Mercedes accelerated effortlessly past 80 kilometers per hour. Nice Race Week in March 1901 included various competitions: hill climbs, sprints, distance races. The Mercedes 35 PS entered multiple events, and from its first appearance, it was clear something extraordinary had arrived. While other cars lurched and wobbled, the Mercedes glided smoothly. While competitors struggled to exceed 60 kilometers per hour, the Mercedes accelerated effortlessly past 80 kilometers per hour. The event organizers had planned various competitions throughout the week. The schedule included sprint races on flat road courses, hill climb competitions, testing power and handling, and longer endurance runs evaluating reliability. Each event attracted entries from Europe's major automobile manufacturers and wealthy private owners wanting to prove their machine's superiority. The weather was perfect. Mild March temperatures on the Côte d'Azur, clear skies, light winds. Crowds gathered along the courses, wealthy spectators in the viewing areas, journalists with notebooks ready to document the results, manufacturers' representatives anxiously watching their vehicles compete. When the Mercedes first appeared during practice sessions, it drew immediate attention. The car looked different from everything else: lower, longer, sleeker. Where other vehicles resembled modified carriages, the Mercedes looked purpose-built. Its proportions suggested speed even standing still. Wilhelm Werner, Jelinek's hired driver, took the Mercedes out for initial runs. Werner was an experienced driver who'd competed in previous races and understood how to extract maximum performance from automobiles. He approached the Mercedes cautiously at first, uncertain how this radical new design would behave. His first impression was revelation. The steering responded immediately and predictably. The car tracked straight without constant corrections. Acceleration was smooth and strong. Most remarkably, the car felt stable, planted, confident, controllable, in ways other cars weren't. Werner pushed progressively harder, gaining confidence with each run. In the sprint races, Werner simply drove away from the competition. The Mercedes' power advantage was significant: 35 horsepower against competitors, making 20-25 horsepower typically. But the real difference was stability and control. Werner could corner at speeds that would have left other cars in the ditch. He could brake later because the car remained composed under heavy braking. He could accelerate earlier out of corners because the car tracked straight without darting unpredictably. One particular sprint race became legendary among those who witnessed it. Werner and the Mercedes faced a field of French cars including Panhards and de Dions, respected manufacturers with proven racing records. At the start, several cars leaped ahead, their drivers aggressively working crude controls. Werner accelerated smoothly, the Mercedes gaining speed progressively. By the first turn, Werner was third, while competitors slowed dramatically for the corner, fighting their car's tendency to understeer or oversteer. Werner maintained higher speed. The Mercedes rotated cleanly, tracking through the corner with minimal drama. Werner exited the turn in second place, accelerating hard. The next straight revealed the Mercedes' superior power delivery. While other cars accelerated jerkily as their engines hunted for power, the Mercedes pulled smoothly and strongly. Werner overtook the leader and began pulling away. The crowd watched in disbelief. This wasn't a close race, it was a demonstration of superiority. The finish wasn't even close. Werner crossed the line seconds ahead of his nearest competitor, with the Mercedes barely working hard while other cars were at their absolute limits. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Applause, amazement, and an immediate buzz of conversation about this remarkable new car. The hill climb events proved even more dramatic. Hill climbs tested a car's power, handling, and driver skill simultaneously. The courses ran up steep mountain roads with tight corners, rough surfaces, and dramatic drop-offs. These were the events where Wilhelm Bauer had died the previous year, highlighting the dangers of inadequate vehicle design. Werner attacked the hill climbs with confidence the Mercedes inspired, while other drivers crept up the hills, nursing their overheating engines and fighting unstable handling. Werner drove aggressively. The Mercedes Honeycomb radiator kept the engine cool even under sustained high-power operation. The low center of gravity and long wheelbase made corners manageable rather than terrifying. Spectators lining the hill climb courses watched in amazement as the Mercedes climbed smoothly, its engine notes steady and strong where competitors' engines labored and stuttered. Werner's confidence was visible. He drove the car rather than fighting it, making smooth inputs that the car rewarded with predictable responses. The times reflected this advantage. Werner's hill climb runs were not just faster, they were significantly faster, often by margins suggesting fundamental superiority rather than incremental advantage. The Mercedes wasn't winning because of a slightly better engine or marginally improved brakes. It was winning because it was a fundamentally better automobile. Spectators were stunned. This wasn't just faster, it was fundamentally different. Other cars looked like mechanical contrivances fighting physics. The Mercedes looked purposeful, controlled, confident. It moved like a machine designed to go fast, rather than a carriage reluctantly tolerating motorization. The crowd included wealthy automobile enthusiasts who understood what they were witnessing. These were people who'd driven various cars, who knew the limitations of existing designs, who recognized genuine innovation when they saw it. Their reaction wasn't just excitement, it was recognition that the automobile industry had just changed forever. Journalists covering the races scrambled to understand what made the Mercedes so superior. They interviewed Werner, who explained the car's stability and confidence-inspiring handling. They examined the Mercedes between races, noting the unusual proportions, the low-mounted engine, the massive radiator. They spoke with other competitors, who unanimously acknowledged the Mercedes' superiority. Other drivers and team managers approached Emil Jelinek, asking about the Mercedes, inquiring whether more could be purchased, trying to understand the technical details. Jelinek, ever the salesman, was gracious but cagey. He knew he had something special and wasn't about to give away competitive secrets before capitalizing on them commercially. Werner won multiple races. The Mercedes dominated its class and often beat heavier, more powerful vehicles. But more than victories, it proved a concept. It demonstrated that automobiles could be fast and safe, powerful and controllable. It showed the world what the future looked like. The automotive press went wild. Journalists who'd covered automobiles for years recognized they were seeing something unprecedented. This wasn't evolutionary, it was revolutionary. The Mercedes 35 PS represented a complete break from previous thinking about automobile design. One journalist wrote that the Mercedes opened a new era in motor car construction. Another called it the first modern automobile. These weren't exaggerations. Every subsequent car would be influenced by what Maybach had created. The template was set. Orders flooded in. Wealthy automobile enthusiasts wanted Mercedes cars. Racing teams wanted them for competition. Jelinek's gamble had paid off spectacularly. His initial order for 36 vehicles was just the beginning. Daimler Motor Company couldn't build them fast enough to meet demand. But here's what's remarkable about the technical specifications. They weren't just advanced from 1901, they established principles that define automobiles to this day. The low center of gravity, the long wheelbase for stability, The powerful engine positioned low in the chassis, the direct steering, the multi-speed transmission. All of this became standard because the Mercedes 35 PS proved it worked. Before the Mercedes, automotive design was random experimentation. Afterward, there was a clear direction. Engineers knew what proportions made sense. They understood that lowering weight and lowering the center of gravity improved handling. They recognized that wheelbase length affected stability. The Mercedes provided the template. The Honeycomb radiator became universal. Within a few years, virtually every automobile manufacturer adopted variations of Maybach's design because nothing else worked as well. That distinctive Mercedes radiator shape, vertical and prominent at the front of the car, became iconic and remained a Mercedes signature for decades. The gate change gearbox pattern became standard. The specific layout varied, but the concept of a hand-operated lever moving through a pattern to select gears was established by the Mercedes and persisted for nearly a century until automatic transmissions displaced manuals. Even the name Mercedes revolutionized automotive marketing. Before Mercedes, cars were typically named after their manufacturers: Daimler, Benz, Panhard, de Dion Button. Jelinek proved that a brand name could be independent of the company name, that a car could have its own identity separate from its manufacturer. This opened up entirely new marketing possibilities. The success of the Mercedes 35 PS transformed Daimler Motor Company. They pivoted their entire product strategy toward Mercedes-branded vehicles. By 1902, they were offering multiple Mercedes models at different price points. The Mercedes name became synonymous with advanced engineering and high performance. Wilhelm Maybach left Daimler in 1907 after disagreements with management. He'd been the genius behind Mercedes' technical excellence, but his relationship with the company became strained. He went on to found his own company, Maybach Motor and Bau, building ultra-luxury cars and later Zeppelin engines. But his legacy at Daimler, the Mercedes 35 PS, defined the company's direction for decades. Emil Jelinek continued as Mercedes' primary salesman and brand ambassador. He legally changed his own name to Jelinek Mercedes in 1903, fully embracing the identity he'd helped create. He remained involved in automotive promotion and racing until his death in 1918. His daughter Mercedes, whose name started it all, lived until 1929. In 1926, Daimler Motor Company merged with Benz and C to form Daimler-Benz AG, the two companies that had pioneered the automobile. Benz with the first practical car in 1886, Daimler-Mercedes with the first modern car in 1901, finally united. The merged company adopted Mercedes-Benz as the brand name, combining both legacies. The Mercedes three-pointed star logo, representing Daimler's ambitions for motorization on land, sea, and air, was registered in 1909. Combined with the Benz laurel wreath in 1926, it created the Mercedes-Benz logo that remains virtually unchanged today. That logo represents a lineage going directly back to the Mercedes 35 PS. Let's talk about what makes the Mercedes 35 PS modern, in specific, tangible ways. Because it's not just that it was advanced for 1901, it's that it introduced concepts that remained relevant for the entire internal combustion age. First, the basic architecture. Front engine, rear-wheel drive, with the engine mounted longitudinally in the chassis. This layout became dominant and remained so for performance cars until very recently. Why? Because it works. It provides good weight distribution, direct power delivery, and allows for balanced handling characteristics. The Mercedes 35 PS proved it in 1901. Second, the proportions. Long hood, short deck, wheels at the corners, low roofline. Look at a modern sports sedan or sports car. The proportions echo the Mercedes 35 PS. Engineers learned that these proportions weren't just aesthetic, they were functional, providing the wheelbase length and weight distribution necessary for good handling. Third, the honeycomb radiator principle, using high surface area for efficient heat exchange. Modern radiators use different materials and more sophisticated designs, but the core concept, maximize surface area for heat dissipation, comes straight from Maybach's 1900 innovation. Fourth, the multi-speed gearbox with direct mechanical linkage. The Mercedes 35 PS had 4 speeds. Modern cars might have 6, 7, or 8, or continuous variable ratios. But the concept of giving the driver, or computer multiple gear ratios to optimize performance across different speeds, traces directly to Maybach's gate change gearbox. Fifth, the integration of all systems into a unified design philosophy. Before the Mercedes, cars were assembled from available components without much thought to how everything worked together. The Mercedes 35 PS was designed as a complete system where engine, chassis, suspension, and steering all complemented each other. This holistic approach became standard in automotive engineering. The performance figures for the Mercedes 35 PS are impressive, even by modern standards when you adjust for context. Top speed was approximately 86 kilometers per hour, which made it one of the fastest cars in the world at the time. But more importantly, it could maintain that speed safely and comfortably, while competitors struggled to exceed 60 kilometers per hour without terrifying their drivers. The acceleration was strong for the era, 0 to 60 kilometers per hour in about 12 seconds. That doesn't sound fast today, but in 1901 it was shocking. Most cars took 20-30 seconds to reach 60 kilometers per hour if they could reach it at all. The Mercedes' strong torque from its large displacement engine made it effortless to accelerate. Fuel consumption was about 20 liters per 100 kilometers. Terrible by modern standards, but reasonable for a high-performance vehicle of the era. The large engine needed fuel, and efficiency wasn't a priority when gasoline was cheap and races were short. The car weighed approximately 920 kilograms, remarkably light considering its size and construction. This weight, combined with 35 horsepower, gave it a power-to-weight ratio that was excellent for 1901. Modern cars have better ratios, but they're working with 100+ years of material science and engine development. Maintenance was intensive by modern standards. The engine required regular oil changes, the cooling system needed attention, the brakes required frequent adjustment, and various mechanical linkages needed lubrication. But by 1901 standards, the Mercedes was actually quite reliable. It could complete long-distance runs without breaking down, which couldn't be said for most competitors. The driving experience was primitive compared to modern cars, but revolutionary compared to contemporary vehicles. The steering was direct and responsive. You turned the wheel, and the car turned predictably. The gearbox shifted smoothly with clear gate positions. The throttle responded progressively to pedal input. These sound basic today, but in 1901, they were revelations. The ride quality was harsh. Solid axles and leaf springs over rough roads meant you felt every bump. But the Mercedes' longer wheelbase and better weight distribution made it smoother than competitors. Drivers reported being able to maintain higher speeds comfortably because the car wasn't constantly fighting them. The brakes were the weakest point, working only on the rear wheels. But the Mercedes' stability meant emergency braking was less dramatic than in other cars. You could brake hard without the vehicle trying to swap ends. Combined with the car's ability to slow down using engine braking through the gearbox, the braking system was adequate for the performance available. Let's talk about the impact the Mercedes 35 PS had on the broader automotive industry. Because this wasn't just a successful racing car, it was a watershed moment that redirected an entire industry's development. Immediately after the 1901 Nice Race Week demonstrations, every major automobile manufacturer began redesigning their products to incorporate Mercedes principles. Lowering the center of gravity, extending wheelbases, increasing power, improving cooling. These became industry-wide priorities practically overnight. The response was fastest in France, then the center of the automotive world. French manufacturers had dominated early automobile development and racing, but the Mercedes suddenly made their designs look obsolete. Companies had to respond or face irrelevance. Panhard and Levasseur in France, which had been dominant in racing, scrambled to update their designs. They built their reputation on reliable, well-engineered cars that won races through dependability rather than outright speed. But the Mercedes offered both speed and reliability, making Panhard's cautious approach seem inadequate. By late 1901, Panhard was developing lower, longer cars with more powerful engines. The Guillaume Boutin, another prominent French manufacturer, known for innovative engine designs, faced similar pressure. Their cars were technically advanced with excellent engines, but still suffered from high centers of gravity. and short wheelbases. They began redesigning chassis to sit lower and extend longer, though their conservative management resisted the most radical changes. Renault, still a young company founded in 1899, saw opportunity in crisis. Rather than defending existing designs, they embraced Mercedes-inspired changes enthusiastically. Renault's racing cars from 1902 onward showed clear Mercedes influence: lower builds, longer wheelbases, more powerful engines with improved cooling. This adaptability helped Renault become one of France's most successful manufacturers. Peugeot, one of the oldest automobile manufacturers, was caught between acknowledging the Mercedes superiority and maintaining pride in their own engineering. Their response was gradual, incorporating some Mercedes principles while trying to claim their designs were independently developed. By 1903, though, Peugeot's cars looked remarkably Mercedes-like in proportions. The Daimler, Renault, Peugeot, all the French manufacturers that had led automotive development in the 1890s, suddenly found themselves behind. The Mercedes had moved the goalposts. What had seemed like perfectly good automotive design in 1900 looked outdated and inadequate by 1902. The industry had to catch up or be left behind. In Germany, the impact was particularly dramatic and complicated. Karl Benz, whose company had created the first practical automobile in 1886, initially resisted the Mercedes design philosophy. Benz was proud of his achievements and skeptical of radical departures from proven designs. His cars remained higher, narrower, and more conservative throughout 1901 and 1902. The market forces were unforgiving. Customers who'd seen Mercedes cars race and read about their technical superiority wanted similar features. Benz's sales began suffering as customers chose competitors' more modern designs. By 1903, even Karl Benz had to accept reality. Benz and Say introduced lower, longer cars clearly influenced by Mercedes principles, though Benz never publicly acknowledged this. The rivalry between Daimler Mercedes and Benz was particularly poignant, given that both companies pioneered the automobile. Benz had created the first practical car, but Daimler had created the first modern car. This distinction would matter enormously when the companies merged in 1926. Mercedes-Benz became the brand name because Mercedes represented the future, while Benz represented the past. In America, where the automobile industry was just beginning to develop, the Mercedes 35 PS provided a blueprint that shaped American automotive development for decades. American manufacturers saw what was possible and aimed to match or exceed it, though adapting to American conditions and preferences. Ransom Olds, whose Oldsmobile curved dash was America's first mass-produced car, studied the Mercedes carefully. While Olds couldn't adopt all Mercedes features, his cars were simpler and cheaper. He incorporated lessons about wheelbase, center of gravity, and engine placement. The improvements helped Oldsmobile dominate early American auto sales. Henry Ford, just beginning his automotive career in 1901, observed the Mercedes' success closely. Ford's early designs showed Mercedes' influence, particularly in chassis layout and proportions. While Ford's production methods and market positioning differed dramatically from Mercedes, the basic engineering principles came from what Maybach had proven worked. In Britain, where the automobile industry was developing slowly due to restrictive laws and conservative attitudes, the Mercedes demonstrated what was technically possible. British manufacturers like Rolls-Royce, founded in 1904, deliberately studied Mercedes designs and incorporated similar principles into their own cars. The legendary Rolls-Royce quality was built on Mercedes-inspired engineering foundations. Racing was transformed. Before the Mercedes, racing success came primarily from raw power: bigger engines, more cylinders, more displacement. The Mercedes proved that superior design could beat raw power. Handling, stability, and driver confidence became as important as horsepower. This made racing more sophisticated and more interesting. The Mercedes 35 PS competed successfully in major races throughout 1901 and 1902. It won at Nice, La Turbie, Paris-Berlin, and countless other events. But more important than individual victories was how it changed what competitors built. Every racing car designed after 1901 showed Mercedes' influence. The car also influenced luxury automobile development. Wealthy customers didn't just want fast cars. They wanted cars that felt advanced, sophisticated, modern. The Mercedes delivered this better than anything else. Its low, sleek proportions looked purposeful and elegant. It became a status symbol, demonstrating that the owner appreciated cutting-edge technology. This established Mercedes' brand position that persists today: technical excellence combined with luxury and prestige. The Mercedes 35 PS wasn't just fast. It was sophisticated. It represented wealth, taste, and an appreciation for engineering excellence. This brand identity would prove more durable than any single technical innovation. The pricing reflected this positioning. The Mercedes 35 PS cost about 13,000 marks in 1901, an enormous sum, roughly equivalent to what a skilled worker might earn in 10 years. Only the wealthy could afford Mercedes cars, but exclusivity was part of the appeal. Owning a Mercedes meant you were part of an elite who appreciated and could afford the finest automotive engineering available. Production numbers were limited initially. Daimler Motor Company built approximately 30 Mercedes 35 PS vehicles in 1901. By 1902, production increased to about 80 units as manufacturing capacity expanded. These weren't mass-market vehicles. They were essentially hand-built, with each car receiving significant individual attention during assembly. The limited production created cachet, but also challenged the company financially. Development costs for the Mercedes 35 PS were high, and low production volumes meant slow cost recovery. Daimler needed to expand production and introduce lower-priced Mercedes models to make the business sustainable. This led to the Mercedes Simplex in 1902, which retained the 35 PS's design philosophy, but with simpler, cheaper construction. The Simplex was still expensive by mass-market standards, but more accessible than the 35 PS. It broadened Mercedes' customer base while maintaining the brand's premium positioning. The evolution continued with additional models: the Mercedes 1822 PS, the 4045 PS, the 60 PS, and others. Each carried forward the design principles established by the 35 PS: low center of gravity, long wheelbase, powerful engine, honeycomb radiator. The template was set. The variations explored different power levels and applications. By 1905, Mercedes was the most successful luxury automobile brand in Europe. They'd won countless races, established unmatched prestige, and proven that technical excellence could command premium prices. The brand that Emil Jelinek had named after his daughter had become synonymous with automotive excellence. But there's a deeper story here about innovation and vision. The Mercedes 35 PS succeeded not because Daimler Motor Company decided to build it, but because Emil Jelinek demanded it. Jelinek was the customer who understood what the product should be before the manufacturer did. This is rare in any industry. Usually, manufacturers lead innovation and customers follow. But occasionally, an informed, demanding customer can push manufacturers beyond their comfort zones. Jelinek did this by combining specific technical requirements with a large financial commitment. He gave Maybach both the vision and the resources to pursue it. Would Wilhelm Maybach have created the Mercedes 35 PS without Jelinek's push? Possibly eventually, but probably not in 1900. Maybach was conservative by nature, preferring proven designs over radical experiments. He needed Jelinek's pressure and guaranteed orders to take the risk. This dynamic, visionary customer, pushing brilliant engineer, created something neither could have achieved alone. Jelinek knew what he wanted, but couldn't design it. Maybach could design it, but wouldn't have without the push. Together, they made history. The story also reveals something about the nature of revolutionary innovation. The Mercedes 35 PS wasn't revolutionary because of a single invention. The engine wasn't fundamentally different from other engines. The transmission wasn't unprecedented. The brakes, suspension, steering, all used existing technology. What made it revolutionary was the integration. It was the first automobile where everything was designed to work together toward a unified goal: safe, fast, controllable performance. Previous cars were assemblies of components. The Mercedes was a system. That difference changed everything. This is the hardest kind of innovation to achieve. Inventing a new component is difficult but straightforward. Rethinking an entire system requires stepping back from details and reconsidering fundamental assumptions. It requires questioning why things are done a certain way and whether better alternatives exist. Maybach's genius was that he could do this. When Jelinek said, "Design a car that's safe at 80 kilometers per hour, Maybach didn't just add power and hope for the best. He reconsidered everything. What wheelbase length provides stability? What center of gravity enables confident cornering? How should weight be distributed? He went back to first principles. The result was a car that worked better, because every element reinforced every other element. The long wheelbase needed the low center of gravity to work properly. The powerful engine required good cooling, hence the Honeycomb radiator. The direct steering only worked well with stable chassis dynamics. Everything connected. This systems thinking approach became the Mercedes-Benz engineering philosophy. It's why Mercedes cars are engineered rather than simply assembled. It's why they emphasize how all systems work together rather than just component specifications. This philosophy traces directly to the Mercedes 35 PS. Let's connect this to modern Mercedes-Benz. When you look at a contemporary S-Class or E-Class, you're seeing the direct descendant of the Mercedes 35 PS. Not mechanically. Obviously, modern cars are vastly more sophisticated. But philosophically, the connection is clear. The low, sleek proportions from the 35 PS, the prominent grille and hood emphasizing the front engine layout. From the 35 PS, the focus on balanced handling and stability. From the 35 PS, the integration of all systems toward refined, confident performance. From the 35 PS, Mercedes-Benz marketing emphasizes the best or nothing. That positioning comes from the Mercedes 35 PS, establishing that Mercedes builds cars to a higher standard, that technical excellence justifies premium pricing, that Mercedes leads and others follow. The three-pointed star logo represents aspirations established by the 35 PS to build the finest vehicles for land, sea, and air. While Mercedes never became dominant in marine or aviation, that ambition for excellence across all motorization came from the success of their first modern automobile. The famous Mercedes-Benz safety innovations, crumple zones, ABS brakes, stability control, countless others, reflect the 35 PS's foundational insight. Performance must be usable. The 35 PS was fast, but more importantly, it was safely fast. Modern Mercedes maintain this philosophy, advanced technology that makes driving safer and more confident, not just faster. The rivalry with BMW traces partially to the Mercedes 35 PS. BMW began as an aircraft engine company and only entered automobiles in 1928. Their ultimate driving machine positioning was deliberately differentiated from Mercedes' best-or-nothing luxury positioning. But both brands emphasize engineering excellence and driving dynamics, territory Mercedes defined with the 35 PS. Compare this to Audi's much later development. Audi was reformed under Volkswagen ownership in the 1960s and had to establish credibility against established luxury brands. They chose technology showcase as their differentiation: quattro all-wheel drive, aluminum construction, LED lighting. But they were competing in a luxury performance space that Mercedes had defined in 1901. The Mercedes 35 PS also influenced how we think about automotive history. It created the concept of the modern car, a vehicle that's recognizably part of our current automotive tradition rather than a primitive ancestor. When people ask, when did cars become modern? 1901 is a defensible answer because of the Mercedes 35 PS. Before the Mercedes, automobiles were experimental. After it, they were established. The basic formula was set: front engine, multi-speed transmission, capable of sustained high speeds, stable and controllable. This formula persisted for over a century, until electric vehicles finally displaced it. Even electric vehicles show Mercedes 35 PS influence. Modern EVs are low, sleek, and aerodynamic because the Mercedes proved those proportions work. They emphasize smooth, confident performance because the Mercedes established that as the standard. They integrate all systems because the Mercedes showed that's how you build great cars. The Mercedes EQS, the brand's flagship electric sedan, demonstrates this continuity. It's low, sleek, and luxurious. It emphasizes refined performance, advanced technology, and systems integration. Remove the electric powertrain and the basic philosophy. Technical excellence in service of sophisticated, confident performance comes straight from the 35 PS. There's something profound about a car designed in 1900, still influencing automotive design and philosophy in 2025. Most technology from 1900 is museum curiosity, interesting historically but irrelevant practically. The Mercedes 35 PS established principles so fundamental that they remained relevant for 125 years. This raises the question, what makes certain innovations timeless while others become obsolete? The answer seems to be whether the innovation works with or against fundamental physical laws. The Mercedes 35 PS worked with physics. Lowering the center of gravity improves stability. Extending the wheelbase improves straight-line tracking. Distributing weight properly improves handling. These aren't temporary truths, they're permanent. Contrast this with innovations that fought physics or relied on temporary technological limitations. Many early automobile designs featured weird experimental layouts, rear engine, mid-engine, unconventional steering, that worked around limitations of available technology, but didn't represent optimal solutions. Once better technology allowed conventional layouts, these experiments disappeared. The Mercedes 35 PS got it right the first time by thinking from physics-first principles rather than working around technological limitations. This is genuine innovation, solving problems in ways that remain valid regardless of technological advancement. There's also a lesson here about the role of competition in driving innovation. The Mercedes 35 PS succeeded commercially because it won races, but it won races because it was better engineered. The competition, both commercial and sporting, created pressure that forced innovation. Without racing, would the Mercedes 35 PS have been created? Probably not. Jelinek wanted a racing car. Racing demands revealed the inadequacies of existing designs. Racing successes proved the Mercedes' superiority and generated orders. Racing was the crucible that forced automotive innovation. This is why motorsport remains important to automotive brands. It's not just marketing, it's genuine technical development under competitive pressure. The lessons learned competing at the edge of performance filter down to road cars. Mercedes understood this from the beginning, because the Mercedes 35 PS proved it. Today, Mercedes-AMG carries forward this racing to road car tradition. AMG began as an independent racing and tuning company before Mercedes acquired it. Now it develops high-performance versions of Mercedes models, maintaining the brand's motorsport connection. The philosophy goes back to the 35 PS. Racing proves technology. Technology creates products. Products build the brand. Formula One, where Mercedes has recently dominated, represents the modern equivalent of the nice race week, where the Mercedes 35 PS proved itself. It's the most visible, most competitive automotive showcase. Success in Formula One, like success at NICE in 1901, validates engineering excellence and generates customer interest. The parallels between 1901 and today are striking. In 1901, Mercedes proved technical excellence through racing success and sold expensive, exclusive cars to wealthy customers. In 2025, Mercedes proves technical excellence through Formula One and sells expensive, exclusive cars to wealthy customers. The business model hasn't fundamentally changed in 124 years. What has changed is scale. In 1901, Daimler Motor Company built dozens of cars. Today, Mercedes-Benz produces millions annually, but the brand essence, technical excellence commanding premium prices, remains consistent. This consistency is rare in business and speaks to how effectively the Mercedes 35 PS established the brand's foundation. So what do we take from this story? First, that genuinely revolutionary innovation often comes from rethinking systems rather than inventing components. The Mercedes 35 PS used existing technology, but combined it in a new way that changed everything. Second, that sometimes innovation requires an outside push. Wilhelm Maybach was brilliant, but he needed Emil Jelinek's vision and financial commitment to create the Mercedes 35 PS. Great engineers need great patrons who understand what's possible before it exists. Third, that fundamental principles endure. The Mercedes 35 PS established design principles in 1901 that remained relevant for over a century because they were based on physics, not fashion. True innovation works with nature, not against it. Fourth, that brand identity, once properly established, can last generations. The Mercedes brand, created by the 35 PS, technical excellence, luxury, sophistication, performance, has persisted for 124 years and shows no signs of weakening. That's the power of starting right. Fifth, that competition drives excellence. The Mercedes 35 PS succeeded because racing forced innovation and proved superiority. Without competition, there's no pressure to improve, no way to validate claims, no reason for customers to pay premium prices. When you see a Mercedes-Benz today, any Mercedes from A-Class to S-Class, you're seeing the legacy of that March day in 1901, when Wilhelm Maybach drove the Mercedes 35 PS at Nice Race Week and showed the world what automobiles could become. Every Mercedes since has been building on that foundation. The next time someone asks you where the modern automobile was born, you can tell them March 1901, Nice, France, with a car called the Mercedes 35 PS. Not because it was the first car. That was Benz in 1886. Not because it was the most powerful. Others had more cylinders and displacement. But because it was the first automobile designed from first principles as a car, not as a motorized carriage. That difference, designing from first principles rather than adapting existing forms, is what made the Mercedes 35 PS revolutionary. And that's the hidden story that almost nobody knows. The story of how a wealthy customer's demands, an engineer's genius, and a tragic death at a hill climb race created the template for every automobile built since. The Mercedes 35 PS wasn't just a car. It was the moment when automobiles stopped being curious experiments and became serious machines. When transportation stopped being about horses and carriages and started being about motorized vehicles designed for that purpose. When the future stopped being unclear and started being obvious. Wilhelm Maybach and Emil Jelinek couldn't have known they were creating something so influential. They were focused on winning races and selling cars, but in pursuing those immediate goals, they accidentally established principles that would shape automotive development for over a century. That's often how genuine innovation works. You're solving immediate problems, meeting specific needs, addressing particular challenges. But if you think deeply enough, if you question assumptions thoroughly enough, if you design from first principles rather than inherited conventions, you sometimes create something that transcends your immediate goals. The Mercedes 35 PS transcended. It started as a racing car for one demanding customer. It became the template for an entire industry. It established a brand that would become synonymous with automotive excellence. It proved that engineering sophistication, not just raw power, was the path to performance. And it showed that sometimes the most important innovations aren't new inventions. They're new ways of putting existing pieces together. The Mercedes 35 PS used technology that already existed, but it combined that technology so effectively, so thoughtfully, that it made everything before it obsolete and set the direction for everything after it. That's the hidden story behind Mercedes-Benz's first modern automobile. A story about vision and execution, about questioning assumptions and thinking from first principles, about how one car, built for one customer, for one race series, changed everything and established a legacy that continues today.